welcome to the Fantasy Rewind Podcast. I'm your co-host, Dylan Stoll, and I'm joined as always by my friend, Michael Whifford.
And win!
So today, we are going to be throwing it back and talking about the movie The Black Cauldron, which came out from Disney back in the 90s. Or did it?
No. Oh, yeah.
So before we get into anything else here, I'm going to give out the typical reminders. So if you want to get in contact with the show, you could get at us on the email, which is fantasyrewindpod@gmail.com. We're also on Instagram, which is @fantasyrewindpod. We're also on Twitter, which is @fantasyrewind. And we're on the TikTok as well, as Mike likes to call it.
On occasion.
Which is @fantasyrewindpod. All right, so without any further ado, let's dive into the rewind.
Fantasy Rewind. All right, the Black Cauldron. Let's get into some history or the lore of this iconic or not iconic.
Controversial.
Depending on really your... Controversial, yeah, it'd probably be the best take for it. The movie that almost killed Disney is something that's been dubbed. And this movie, man, it went through a lot. So this was the 25th animated release from Disney. So kind of a pretty big hallmark for them, right? And this movie was originally released in 1985. To put this in perspective, it was originally supposed to be released in 1980. And that's 9 years after they acquired the rights to release the movie. Which there is usually a process after they get their rights into actually making the final product. But it went through a lot of stuff. So let me just kind of go through the book series it was based off of, and then we'll go through some of the history of this whole production mess. So the Black Cauldron is based off of the Chronicles of Prydain series by Lloyd Alexander. Those books were released between 1964 and 1968. It was a book a year. And there's 5 books in this series. They're kind of like children's literature, but more in the realm of Chronicles of Narnia-esque and, yeah, kind of in that realm. There's death and, you know, some definite themes there for probably older elementary and middle school kids. Now, this movie, it kind of came at an interesting time for Disney because they were going through some changes in their animation staff. And I'm not going to go through names and people leaving and everything else. Outside of like Don Bluth, who is actually a pretty famous animator. He ended up leaving during this project. He went and he formed a new team. He created like The Secrets of Nim. I want to say The Rock-a-Doodle Rooster, whatever that movie was. If you remember that animated movie.
I don't know.
It's okay. He also worked on An American Tale.
Oh yeah, Father Goes West.
With the mouse. Yeah. Well, he didn't do he didn't do the second one. And he did the other Steven Spielberg animated one with the dinosaurs, I believe.
Yeah, dinosaurs.
Anyway. No, not dinosaurs. It was the one where the dinosaurs end up at this carnival and all that.
Yeah. I forget what that one's called. I used to love that movie, though.
I forget either. We're Back.
We're back. Yeah. That's exactly what it is. Yeah.
So anyway, so Don Bluth, who was the lead animator and one of the up-and-coming animators at Disney, who had learned from the old guard, supposedly, left. And with him, quite a few other people left as well. So their staff was pretty much stretched thin. They released The Fox and the Hound, and then they get working on this project. As I said, this went and took 9 years. It was scheduled to be released in 1980, and it took... then that was 9 years, and then it didn't come out for another 5 years after. It ended up being directed by Ted Berman and Richard Rich, and they were ones who had worked on the Fox and Hound project as well. And as I said, it was loosely based on the books by Lloyd Alexander. Now, this was the first Disney animation that ended up getting rated PG. It was also the first animated movie to use CG in some of its effects. Like, when you notice it when you watch it now, which is really interesting, like the smoke and some of the water and all that. Like, definitely is kind of, it almost looks like it's layered on because it is. Now, they had a new head at Disney when they were finishing up this movie or getting ready to finish it up. They showed him, and I don't know their names, doesn't matter too much, but they showed him the original copy. He thought it was too dark and pretty much wanted it like edited to all Kingdom Come, and it did end up getting pretty much put to the butcher's block. There's apparently a version somewhere, a lot of speculation on this, with the original cut, which was much darker and would have warranted a much higher rating than PG. What we end up getting is one that was cut up and shortened. It's interesting to think what could have been. Anyway, they had a lot of different things they wanted to do with this. There was talks at the time they were going to do like hologram Cauldron Born coming out when that scene started in movie theaters, and so like Cauldron Born would rise up.
That'd be awesome.
And they were really like trying to do too much thing. They had too much turnover, and they were trying to innovate on too much things, going in too many directions. And I think you can really kind of tell with this movie that it did suffer in some senses with pacing and what the actual story was. We know it was released in 1985. It cost $44 million. It grossed $22 million. So that's why when people say, oh, this was the movie that almost killed Disney, like, it didn't make a ton of money. And after this, they thankfully ended up still releasing animated movies. It wasn't, it was a sore thought, or it's a sore, not a sore subject. It's a sort of a blemish on their record. It wasn't actually released to VHS until 1998, which brings up Dylan's point about it being a 90s movie, because if you watched it in VHS, it wasn't until 1998, which was 13 years after it was released.
Which is where I first watched it, in those big, thick plastic cases that Disney movies used to come in, and that was my first exposure to Black Cauldron.
Yeah. So it kind of sits in this like weird cult status now. Interestingly enough, too, this has, unlike pretty much every other Disney animated film, a soundtrack that features no songs with singing.
Yeah, no
it's
vocals.
Just music. Yeah. And there's talks right now, maybe down the line of possibly a live-action remake, but who knows? Who knows?
It'll only cost them $4,400 million.
Yeah, so that's kind of its weird sort of tangled history. It's kind of a shame. Let's go ahead and dive right into your exposure to this when you originally watched it, what you would maybe originally felt about it, Dylan. You want to start us off?
Yeah, so growing up, I was limited to pretty much only being able to watch Disney movies as a kid. And so for me, when this movie came out in 1998 on VHS, I was all about it, because this was the most non-Disney Disney movie that there is. It's dark, it's fantasy-driven, it's gritty, there's a very unlikable protagonist, and it actually, it's one of those movies where you watch it and you're like, I can't believe this is Disney other than the animation style. And so
agreed.
Growing up in the 90s there, in a bit of a sheltered household, being able to watch Black Cauldron and feel like I was watching something I shouldn't be watching, that was a good feeling. And so that was my first exposure to Black Cauldron. What about you, Mike?
So interestingly enough, I did end up reading the books, actually before I watched the movie. I don't know if I read the books because a teacher suggested it to me, or an adult definitely suggested it to me, and I ended up reading it and really enjoying the book series. I only read it through once, though, and to be honest with you, my memories of it are very hazy. But I really enjoyed the book series, ended up watching the movie afterwards, and was appalled at how different the movie was from the book. But at the same time, as I look back, I'm like, what was really different? Yeah, we'll get into that. There are some big differences, but not as many as you would think in terms of like super significant in reflection. Let's go ahead and jump into just kind of a general overview of the story here. So we have an evil king, according to the Black Cauldron.
The movie.
The evil king. There was this, yes, the movie. When we reference Black Cauldron, the book series, let's do Chronicles of Prydain, because Black Cauldron isn't even the first book. It's the second book in the series. So if you go to read this series, just know you do not start with the Black Cauldron book. So we have an evil king, this spirit of a demon. He's trapped in this Black Cauldron, and the cauldron spits out evil soldiers, or what they are referred to in the movie, Cauldron Born. So Dylan, that's kind of the whole premise. Like, this is the evil character that the Horned King is after, and he's trying to create this army to take over Prydain. And you have a pig farmer, Taryn, who has this mystical pig, Henwin, and they're taken care of kind of by this older gentleman, Dalbin, who seems to be kind of like a wizardy type man. Basically, they want to keep Henwin away from the Horned King because that's how he's going to be able to find the Black Cauldron. And that's sort of the premise of this show, the movie. As we watched it, and we'll get into more of it as we go, who were some of your favorite characters, or who was your favorite character?
Well, I'll tell you right now, my favorite character was not Taran, because he was the worst. My favorite character was probably Princess Elanwe, because she comes out of nowhere, saves Taran from crying in the dungeon cell, and has her little floating bauble. And every time there's like something that requires thinking, she's the one that actually steps up to the plate, and she's the one that kind of is the standout character of the movie, other than Gurgi, who of course is like your man-beast Gollum-y like character who is so unlikable in the Movie as well that I'm almost happy when he dies. And
his crunchy munchies.
But yeah, Princess Elan was my favorite character in the series here. What about you, Mike? Who's your favorite character in the movie?
In the movie, I really like Gurgi. Don't judge me too hard. I just think he's so cute and like, okay, so if Gurgi is Smeagol, because Gurgi's really Smeagol. Creeper is Gollum. It's like if you had Smeagol instead of Gollum, like Smeagol in Lord of the Rings, you know? I don't know. He makes the tough decisions, and he learns from his mistakes and wants to change, and he's cool. I think Gurgi's cool because Gurgi does something that Taran does not have the cojones to do in the end.
Yes.
Of the movie.
Yeah, of the movie.
Of the movie. Again, I just think it's funny too, like the crunchy munchies and all this. I was just like sitting there dying on the couch last night. I was like, oh my god.
No, I seriously though, I cannot watch Black Cauldron and see Gurgi come up without thinking, oh my god, they stole Smeagol. They stole Gollum.
Which is so funny. I wonder if some of the line like sayings and line like phrasing and how it Smeagol was sort of portrayed was maybe slightly influenced from this, because this came out obviously before the Lord of the Rings trilogy. So I'm just saying maybe the actor did take a little bit of inspiration.
Yeah, it's so funny that you bring that up, because like you said, this movie, The Black Cauldron, came out years and years before Peter Jackson ever made the Lord of the Rings trilogy. So I almost wonder if the actor who plays Gollum, Andy Serkis, took inspiration from Gurgi for his portrayal of Smeagol and Gollum, because they're so similar in my mind.
They are really similar. So, yeah, that was kind of a neat little thing as I was watching too last night. I was like, oh yeah, and making the connection between Creeper and Gollum as well. Except Creeper's not quite as vicious.
No. He's more self-loathing.
Okay, next question I have for you here. What was the most interesting element to the story for you?
For me, the most interesting element of the story probably was just the concept of the Black Cauldron itself, where, you have this evil entity that's been basically transfigured into this Black Cauldron that can't be destroyed, basically gives the person who controls it an unkillable army, if only they learn to put a grate on the top of it, and then or put a lid on it. But
but then the soldiers can't get out.
Yeah, crawl out the mouth. But yeah, so just like the Black Cauldron itself being able to be used to make this unkillable army, basically, it's just it's a cool concept in my mind. It's something that a lot of people would love to have, like Sauron, Voldemort. Anybody like that, the White Queen from Narnia, like any villain would love to have an unkillable army at their disposal. So the fact that the Horned King wants it, seeks it out, and is basically gift-wrapped the Black Cauldron by the incompetence of Taran, then it's too perfect for like a cool little plot device for it. What about you, Mike? What's your favorite like element or like story beat from the Black Cauldron?
From the movie itself, it was when Taran gave up the sword for the Black Cauldron. The witches too. We'll get into it when we get into the differences between the book and the movie. But the witches here, when they ask for the sword, when they see the sword, him giving it up, because in the movie his whole characterization is he wants to be this warrior, this knight, and him finally being like, you know what, I'm just a pig farmer.
Yeah.
Like, it's not that I shouldn't have dreams, but I need to be realistic as well. Because what got me into so much trouble has been the daydreaming. And so by giving up the sword, something that literally could make him the best knight ever, because it, did all the work for him. I thought that was a really cool beat for his character and shows maturity, and was probably the turning point for him in terms of like him being interesting and like making good decisions.
Yeah, I mean, you're right there, because
like
from that point on, when Taran gets rid of the sword, he starts, first of all, he gets captured. Second of all, he gets released by Gurgi. Then his initial reaction is, I'm free. Let me kill myself to end this cauldron-born menace. And he goes up and tries to do that before Gurgi takes his place. But, I mean, I guess you're right. Yeah, from that point forward, when he gives up the sword and realizes, okay, I gotta be more down to earth. I gotta stop dreaming of being this famous knight because I'm not that thing. I'm a pig farmer who's bad at my job. And he can, from that point on, he is a more likable character, but he's still, to me, the bane of the movie.
Yeah, that's fair. All right, so let's get into overall impressions real fast.
Yeah. So for me, I know my overall impression is that, again, for a Disney movie, this is dark. Like, this movie is no joke. Like, I wouldn't show this to a 4-year-old and, like, let them sit in front of the screen with no adult there, because they'd probably cry seeing the Horned King and the Cauldron Born. But, it's...
Agreed. I cried.
It's a good movie if you kind of are just looking for, like, a King Arthur-esque movie where you kind of see, like, that nobody peasant going up to being like this famous warrior or famous knight or whatever, and kind of going on a quest and everything. So it's interesting in that respect. All in all, it is not my favorite Disney movie now, but it is one that I don't think deserves the hate that it probably got at the time when it came out, because it's okay. It's not great. It's better than the Ralph Bakshi Lord of the Rings. It's not too good, though. It's still pretty bad. But, it is what it is. It's a okay enough non-Disney Disney movie that's all about a fantasy quest and everything.
Yeah. I think the issue here with this movie is because of all that production, and the people who were trying to create it just couldn't finish the vision they had. Right?
Weren't allowed to finish
it just
the
feels
vision.
like there is pieces missing. Like, characters change very quickly, and they had to do a lot with it. And I think, honestly, this property could definitely use a refresh. And I think it would be great to do a refresh with it, because there is enough interesting elements here between, like, the witches and that magic system, and the war going on, the Horn King, all of that. Like, there's enticing elements to it that, it'd be cool to see it revisited and redone, even if it is by another company than Disney.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Mike.
I was just going to say, overall, I agree with you. If we were doing this out of like out of 10, it'd probably be like on the 4 side for me.
I agree with that. Probably about like a 4 out of 10. But, like, so for me, like, I think that this is a property where it would be cool to actually see it modernized. And by modernized, I mean, a modern take with special effects and not censored and allowed to be darker like it originally was intended to be. which is crazy to me why it's a children's book. And I can't even imagine that. But I do think that, like, if they gave this like a Disney Plus series where, like they did with Willow, it could be pretty cool. The question, though, would be if they would be allowed to go as dark as they wanted to. I think that part of what fails in this movie is the early stage CGI. And you can really tell it's early stages. I also like have some questions about some of how things happen in the movie. Like, I have no idea how the Horned King even found out about Henwig, the pig there, because that's never explained. Because the farmer's like, "Oh, we got to keep her secret." Oh no, the Horned King knows. How did he find out?
I was the only one that knew.
Yeah, and I just
until
told you.
You also knew.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, they mentioned a very vague war going on, and yeah, there's a lot of elements there. That's what I said, though. There is a lot there that's ripe. So let's go ahead and transition here into some of the differences from the source material. So there's quite a bit with characters. Like, there's a lot of characters that don't make it into the film. I'm not going to get into them and all their names. I don't remember them all, and I don't want to butcher half of them. So we're going to skip that piece. All right, let's start here. Aaron, who is he's actually the main antagonist in the book series, not the Horned King. Now, if that name does not sound familiar, he was mentioned maybe very briefly. He's the one who is trapped in the cauldron in the movie.
I thought so.
Or the evil king they talked about before. But he is the main antagonist in the book series, not the Horned King. The Horned King is like his general. It's right there. Major difference between the movie and the book series. Second, Dobbin. He is 379 years old. And he's like bald and he's a little portly, but he also has a very long beard. He's very much like supposed to be kind of like a Merlin.
Right, a Merlin character, Gandalf character.
Yeah. And this kind of leads into the witches. So they actually raised Dobbin and they gave him the Book of Three, which sort of starts this whole thing. And the witches are really interesting because, so they're definitely based, I believe a lot of the Chronicles of Prydain books are based off of mythology.
Say like the Fates, maybe.
Yes, they are based off of the Fates where they shared either a body or an eye or something like that. Like, there was some kind of sharing between them. They had a really neat element because in the movie, they're characterized as ugly and whatever. But in the books, at night, they became beautiful. Like, they transformed into these beautiful women, which I think is kind of neat because I think oftentimes we do characterize witches as just these ugly, creatures.
Ugly old hags.
Yes, and it's kind of neat to have a different take on that. You know, it's sort of like the same thing where evil's always ugly or fat. And thankfully we started to get away from that, but c'est la vie. All right, Henwin.
Yeah.
Henwin needs to use some different materials, like there's like runes or something involved. And Henwin actually has putative power over the cauldron, and it's not quite like knows exactly where it is. So there's some big differences there in the power. Also, Taran takes Henwin on an adventure before Henwin's captured, not Henwin like he was taking Henwin to escape. So some differences there. Gurgi was not the one who sacrificed himself. Prince Eladar actually sacrificed himself, who was a character we didn't meet.
Really quick, Mike, hold on. Sorry to interrupt the character and the section here, but you said Gurgi was your favorite character. So, first time you watched the movie, what was your reaction to Gurgi throwing himself into the cauldron?
Well, they never introduced Prince Eladar, so I pretty much was like, oh, no. Like, I actually like Gurgi.
No, the first time I watched this movie and Gurgi threw himself in the cauldron, I cried, of course. Like, I'm not going to deny that. Like, it was a sad moment, and it's a heartfelt moment, because Gurgi's like, no, Taran, not you. You have lots of friends. Gurgi has no one. I have no reason to live. Toss myself in.
Yeah, Yeah.
And of course, the Gurgi comes back to life at the end of the Black Cauldron movie. I'm assuming this prince does not.
No, that is something that is different. They really wanted there to be human choice kind of dictates fate sort of element there, or theme going on. So when the prince chooses to sacrifice himself, he stays dead. So, yeah. But I thankfully did not watch this movie when I was as young as you were when you watched it. I didn't. I was gonna say I didn't watch it until I was probably in high school or college, because I remember downloading it, not in the most legal of ways, and watching it that way. So, yeah, allegedly. So I did not cry, but I sat there and I was like, huh, okay, that's a choice. All right, this is actually kind of a big one. So, Creeper is a completely original character for the movie. He is not in the books at all. Yeah, so, I mean, you probably could, if any of the characters, you probably see that, and he doesn't really add too much, but still.
No, a throw-in piece, like a punching bag almost for the Horned King.
Yeah, but he brings some comic relief, but still, it would be kind of neat to think, what would that character have been like in the book? All right, some other smaller ones here. The bauble that the princess has does not float around her. It's literally a glass ball that glows. Oh,
way less cool.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Also, the castle they get imprisoned in is a different one, and it's So there's a lot there. The Horned King is not the main villain. Aran is, and that's really the main big plot difference, and how they sort of all interact. And because what happened in the movie takes place over 2 books, there's obviously a lot more with a lot of different characters. Like Taran he doesn't give up the magic sword, he gives up a brooch instead that's magical, and he gets that from another character, and that's a whole thing. So there is a lot there. The last one I want to hit on, though, is the fairies, which we didn't even talk about.
Yeah, they were kind of like the little borrower people that reminded me of the little not so PC people from Willow. Brownies.
Yeah, the Rowdies. So they're Dolly, the one who leads them to the cauldron, is actually a dwarf, and so isn't the king. And I believe maybe most of them are. Now, they can turn invisible, but it's only when they hold their breath.
Oh, that's cool. I like that.
Yeah, it is kind of a neat little power thing. So those are kind of some of the major differences between the book and the movies. I do want to say, though, I'm sure there's a lot more. Because I remember, as I said before, when I read the books and I watched the movie, I was like, what did I just watch? That was not the books. I did want to stress that. But overall, as I was researching some of the differences, I was kind of like, well, it's not really, it doesn't seem like that major. But I do believe that the antagonist difference is a big thing.
Yeah, I could definitely see that being the case. All right, so that's going to do it for our coverage of the Black Cauldron movie by Disney.
Yeah.
So we're going to have a little bit of a break here in between podcasts because I'm going to be traveling down to New Zealand and going to Hobbiton and seeing all that the Shire has to offer in the flesh. So totally excited about that. When I come back from New Zealand, I would love to do a podcast just talking about my experience at Hobbiton. If you're down to hear about that, Mike.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, should definitely have that conversation. I think that'd be a lot of fun. You'll have to remember all the town names and everything else.
Yeah, I mean, that's what my note sections are for in my book. So, I have resources to use.
Great.
All right. But with all that being said, that's going to do it for us for this week. It's going to be 2 Nerds signing off. See ya.
See ya. Like a cauldron born.